Chapter 5: Data Collection Techniques. Advantages of the questionnaire. The questionnaire, especially the mail, email, and web-based questionnaire, tends to encourage frank answers. The characteristics of the questionnaire that help to produce frank answer also eliminate interviewer bias. Another way of stating the second advantage is that the fixed format of the questionnaire tends to eliminate variation in the questioning process. The manner in which a mail questionnaire is distributed and responded also allows it to be completed within limit at the leisure of the participants. Questionnaire can be constructed so that quantitative data are relatively easy to collect and analyze. Questionnaire can facilitate the collection of large amount of data in a relatively short period of time. Last but not the least, questionnaire are usually relatively inexpensive to administer. Disadvantages of the questionnaire. Use of the mail questionnaire eliminate personal contact between the researcher and the respondent. The mail questionnaire does not permit the respondent to clarify answers to ambiguous questions or at least makes it more difficult. Studies have shown that persons who are highly opinionated regarding the subject of a questionnaire are more likely than others to be data collection techniques motivated enough to complete and return it. Questionnaire may be more difficult and educated participants to complete, again possibly resulting in a bias returned. In general, there simply seems to be resistance to mail questionnaire. In the extreme case, this can result in some participants attempting to sabotage. Non-response rates are relatively high for mail, email, and web-based questionnaire, although web-based service often first use another survey method to recruit participants. If the questionnaire is distributed electronically, reach only those who have access to and are comfortable using email and web technologies. Types of question according to information needed. Factual questions. Questions used to ascertain such things as the respondent's age, gender, and so on. They are probably the most straightforward type of questionnaire item. Opinion and attitude questions. Questions intended to determine a person's ideas, inclinations, prejudices, convictions, and so on. Information questions. Question designed to measure the respondent's knowledge about some topic. Self-perception questions. Questions quite similar to attitude questions but restricted to one's opinions about himself or herself. Standards of action questions. Questions used to determine how respondents would act in certain circumstances. Questions that actual past or present behavior. Questions that potentially fall within some of the categories of questions already identified but tend to be narrowing in the focus on behavior. Projective questions. Questions that allow respondents to answer questions indirectly by imposing their personal beliefs, attitudes, and so on onto others. There are two basic types of questions: open-ended questions and fixed response questions. Open-ended or unstructured questions, as the name indicates, are designed to permit free responses from participants rather than ones limited to specific alternatives. They are especially useful for exploratory studies. They are called for when the issue is complex, when the relevant dimensions are not known, or when the interest of the researcher lies in exploration of the process or of the individual's formulation of an issue. Open-ended questions are: what do you think about the library? Which library services do you value the most? Fixed response or structured questions, also known as closed questions, limit the responses of the participants of the stated alternative. The possible responses may range from a simple yes or no to the checklist of possible replies to a scale indicating various degree of a particular response. An example of a pre-coded questionnaire it follows. Answerable by yes or no. Do you have a current library card? In this example, the respondent would be asked to circle the number representing his or her answer, A1 or A2, whichever the response happens to be. Basic research methods for librarians would be entered into the dataset for future analysis. Statement scale value. I believe the public library is an important agency for educating citizens. I believe the public library duplicates educational services provided elsewhere. I believe the public library is of value only for recreational reading. Question wording. The way in which the contents of questionnaires items are worded can also affect their validity and reliability. Consider the following two questions. Do you think the US should forbid public speeches against democracy? Or do you think the US should not allow public speeches against democracy? Sources of error. Before continuing with the outline of the procedures for developing a questionnaire, it may be worthwhile to consider some of the type of questionnaire error not already discussed. Some of the more common type of error are bias, not all of which are limited to questionnaires are the following. Researcher bias. In essence, this bias results from the researcher unconsciously developing the questionnaire in a manner that will increase the likelihood of obtaining the desired results. Sponsorship bias. This bias results from the researcher's hopefully unconscious attempt to produce research that will please the outside agency funding the research. Imperfection of design. Weaknesses in the design of the questionnaire can result in bias or inaccurate responses. Such imperfections, data collections techniques include haphazard sequencing, inadequate instructions, and a failure to explain the purpose and the scope of the study. Respondent interpretation. As implied earlier, various interpretations of the facts and key terms by the respondents also can result in accurate answer. Time lapse. It has been found that answers to the same questions tend to vary over time even when not directly affected by the passage of time. Circumstances. A variety of factors such as carelessness and mood of the respondent, ambiguous questions, unthinking answers, and general resistance to questionnaires can produce inaccurate responses. Response bias. Error can result from the response rate being low and thus the final sample ends up less representative than originally conceived. Some intensives can be included with an email or web-based questionnaire by initiating a trigger for the gift when the questionnaire is completed and submitted, and being realistic about eligibility criteria for subjects. Reactive insight. There is a growing concern that as subject participants in service over time, especially in service dealing with sensitive topics, they may begin to rethink their lives, attitudes, and so on. The pretest. After obtaining an informal evaluation of the questionnaire, it should be pretested fully. This pretest is something referred to as a pilot study, although pilot study is actually more synonymous with exploratory study. Final editing. Having been pretested, the questionnaire is ready for final editing before distribution. It is recommended that the title of the study or survey be placed at the top of the questionnaire. Cover letter. In most cases, a cover letter should accompany the questionnaire. The basic purpose of the cover letters is to explain briefly the purpose of the study and to stress the importance of each person's responding. Distribution of the questionnaire. These are the three main methods of administering the survey questionnaire. The questionnaire can be self-administered, which means that the respondents are asked to complete the questionnaire themselves, administered face-to-face to respondents by researchers, or administered to respondents via the telephone by interviewers. The self-administered questions can be mailed or electronically transmitted via email or the web. Mail questionnaire. Unless the questionnaire is designed as a self-mailer or is to be faxed or emailed back to the researcher, it should be accompanied by a self-addressed, stamped, return envelope. Electronic questionnaire. In the relatively recent past, surveys have been designed for participants to enter their response directly into a computer. However, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, email questionnaires were more often used because of the case of transmission, the immediacy of delivery, and the low cost of distribution. The interview. Developing the interview. The basic steps in developing a standardized or structured interview are not that different from those for developing most other kinds of survey studies. Conducting the personal interview. The interviewer should attempt to create a friendly, non-threatening atmosphere, much as one does with a cover letter. The interviewer should give a brief, casual introduction to the study, stress the importance of the person's participation, and assure anonymity or at least confidentiality when possible. Disadvantages of the interview. As with other research methods and techniques, bias presents a real threat to the variety of interviewers. Advantages of the interview. In contrast to the mail or electronic questionnaire, the interview does have contain important advantages. Perhaps most important, it almost always produces a better response rate. Telephone interviews. Another important type of interview is the telephone interview because more and more interviews are being conducted over the telephone. This technique deserves special attention.